Hey, what's going on, folks? Welcome back to the Parkside Merchant channel. Today we're going to be doing another installment in my video series going through my top 10 favorite cards from each of the 11 first original vintage Yu-Gi-Oh sets, LOB all the way through Ancient Sanctuary. We're now up to Magician's Force. Interesting set. This is, I think, one of the more underrated sets, frankly, from vintage Yu-Gi-Oh! It doesn't really get a lot of attention because it came kind of late, and I think a lot of people were kind of getting out of Yu-Gi-Oh! Around this point. So it also had kind of a lower print run, I think, anecdotally, is what people say. So there may not have been as much of it out there back then, and so I don't know. For whatever reason, you don't hear a lot of people talk about this set too much these days. But it's an interesting set. I certainly enjoyed it. I definitely had a lot of these cards as a kid. And was still pretty active in Yu-Gi-Oh! At the time. Basically, for this video, I'm going to go through my top 10 favorite cards from the set. They're not ranked in terms of like value or in terms of, playability or anything like that. There's no specific metric that I'm really using to rank these. It's basically just from my perspective in hindsight, what are the 10 cards from each set that I like the most and that I valued the most as a kid. And even as an adult, right? These are pretty much my current state opinions about which cards I like the most from each of these sets. Enough about that. Let's go ahead and dive in here. So my first card from Magician's Force is United Resistance. And I think what I liked about this card was really just the artwork. I know it's a common. It's not really that rare. Probably not a lot of people care much about this card, but I always just kind of liked this artwork. Certainly remembered it. This was definitely one of the more memorable commons for me from the set, and makes my top 10 in terms of my favorite cards from Magician's Force. The next card that I really liked from this set is the Xyz Dragon Cannon. This was a big Kaiba card during the Battle City tournament there, towards I think one of those final matches. I know he played this card there, but it was neat, right? It was a big card, big stats, interesting combo there with a couple of those X head, Y head, Z metal dragon pieces and components and things. So it was a card you remembered, and then it was also part of that tin. There was one of the booster pack tins that had this thing as a secret rare. So in hindsight, definitely one of the more interesting and compelling cards, I think, from the Magician's Force set. And I did kind of like the artwork there too as well. It had sort of a barrel dragon kind of a theme to it with respect to a lot of the colors and how it was architected. Next up, this is kind of a weird choice, but it was a weird card, Remove Brainwashing. I just, as a kid, was always a little disturbed by this artwork. It was always a little weird to me and kind of freaked me out. And so it still kind of does to this day. It's a freaky artwork and definitely something I didn't forget from the set. And so it makes my top 10 for basically the standout, memorable cards from the set. This certainly was one of them, for me, at least. Okay, next card here was the Magical Scientist. There are some commons that are common, right? You always have a way of pulling them, and this must have been one of those cards that I just pulled a bunch of because I really remembered it, and I had a couple of them. But I liked it. I thought it was an interesting character, just sort of a scientific dude that was like in a laboratory doing some kind of experiments and some stuff. Looks like he's kind of got some dragons and some monsters and humanoids and things in his tanks. But I think it was mostly the artwork that I liked about the card. There was also a video game at the time that I had played that I had gotten at Blockbuster. And this artwork always kind of reminded me of that particular video game. And I'll put it up here. I think it was like Dr. Muto or Dr. something like that. And this kind of always reminded me a little bit of that particular game. So just weird, the kind of stuff you remember as a kid, right? Next up, we have the Dimension Jar. This whole set, right, is Magician's Force, and it has a lot of different artworks and different monsters that are related to the work of a magician. And a lot of times, magicians do lots of tricks with different types of cabinets and jars and things where they appear on one side and disappear on the other and all that sort of stuff. So, I don't know, I just kind of always liked the card and the artwork. It was very simplistic, but something I always enjoyed to look at. And I think it was a short print as well, which kind of made it sort of hard to find to a degree. So cool card, something I always liked from the set. Number 5, we're down to the top 5 now for Magician's Force. Dark Magician Girl was one of the cards that I certainly did like from the set. It was a rare find, right? A lot of people didn't have the card. It was big on the show. And just overall was something I think a lot of people back then wanted to have in their collections, and to this day is still a very valuable card. It's one of the most submitted cards in PSA for Yu-Gi-Oh! As a matter of fact, I think there's been just about 400 or north of 400 copies that have been submitted to PSA from the first edition, just first edition. I'm sure there's been lots of unlimiteds too that have been submitted as well, but very popular card and definitely makes my top 5 easily for the Magician's Force set. Now next up we have another common, People Running About. I talked a bit about this card actually in a different video that I did about some of the silliest or most absurd Yu-Gi-Oh cards. And this was definitely one of them, right? It's just a bunch of people running around in the town square. This is the kind of funny stuff that you always remember when you're a kid, right? It's just weird and funny and silly. And to this day, it is, I think, a silly card and one that I remember very clearly from the set, and an easy top 5 pick for me. So we talked about People Running About. We talked about Dark Magician Girl. What are the top 3 cards from this set, in my opinion, you may ask? Well, my perspective on this is probably going to be different than what a lot of people would. A lot of folks probably think the Dark Magician Girl is the best card from the set. And sure, I mean, I appreciate that. I get that. But at least when I was a child as a collector, and even to this day, it's cool, but it's definitely not my favorite thing out of the set. So getting down into our top 3, number 3 we have the Dark Paladin. Probably not a surprise here. I'm not a huge fan of the alternative artwork, for what it's worth. I like it in this just original, very familiar artwork. It's what I grew up with. I never really got the alternative artwork, so this is the one that's like the OG version, at least in my memory. And it's the one that I like the most. It's a cool card, right? Buster Blader, Dark Magician are both staples for people that grew up with original Yu-Gi-Oh! And so this was like right up there in terms of level of interest and level of importance. And to this day, it remains a very popular and very interesting card, I think, for a lot of people who are fans of vintage Yu-Gi-Oh! From the 11 sets. Number 2 is Luster Dragon. You may recall from my Legacy of Darkness video, I'm a big fan of Luster Dragon number 2. I do like this particular version of the Luster Dragon as well. I had several of these as a kid. And it's not a huge stat card. It's not much to write home about, but I always enjoyed looking at the Luster Dragon cards. I liked the artworks on them. And I just thought they were very sophisticated, very nice additions to a dragon collection if you were a big fan of some of the other dragons from several of the other sets. So I always liked the Serpent Knight Dragon. I know a lot of people don't like that card very much. And I liked the Red Eyes Black Dragon. Some people aren't huge fans of that one either, but all these dragon cards I always had an interest in, and this was no exception. And it's basically one of my favorite cards from this particular set. Now, the last card, the Paladin of White Dragon. Here's the story on this one. I like the card. I like the artwork quite a bit. I do like the nostalgia around kind of this monster and sort of its connection to the Blue Eyes White Dragon, right? It's just a very fun, interesting card to me and stood out to me as a kid. So it had kind of that element going for it. And now, in hindsight, right, as I've matured as a collector and gotten more up to speed and more knowledgeable about this market and about the card, this is actually one of the most difficult cards in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! To get in a PSA 10. It's a very low proportion that grade 10 out of the total pop. There are almost none of these ever for sale. I haven't seen one in months, frankly, and I've kind of been looking for it because I wouldn't mind having this in a PSA 10, but they just are not available. Maybe people have exchanged them off the books and things like that. I'm not saying there aren't deals that happen, but on eBay, I have not seen a PSA 10 of this thing listed, at least in the past several months. Maybe I missed it, but my sense is these don't come up very often. And they probably will go for quite a lot of money if they ever do trade hands. So I think this one for me kind of has the collectible element going for it as well. It's a really hard card to get in a PSA 10. Very rarely seems to change hands these days. And that on top of the fact that I liked the card as a kid, and it's got the Blue Eyes White Dragon sort of theme woven into the artwork and such. I just like the card a lot. So that's my number 1 for this particular set. So that's all here, folks. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know in the comments down below. How would you rank your top 10 or top 5 or whatever from Magician's Force? Anything in here that you disagreed with vehemently? Let me know in the comments. I'm always interested to hear people's perspectives on some of these things. As always, I appreciate everybody's time and support. This is the Parkside Merchants channel, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.